Hey there, I'm Scott, and this is Tangents. Well, maybe it's not. I don't know. I'm considering doing something a little bit different. Not necessarily going to cancel Tangents. I think this might be kind of like folded into it. I'm not even sure if I'm going to do this, so it could be completely, just an idea that is fleeting and then I give it up. But I'm really bothered by what I would generally term journalistic malpractice, and I think there are many categories under which this falls, but it's a thing that really I think it's very pervasive, and I think it's something. It actually is one of the progenitors of the term fake news. Not that fake news was a real thing, but there was enough journalistic malpractice and enough bad journalism that when Trump started screaming fake news, it actually had enough, legs to get a bit of traction. And I I think this is not a good thing. I mean, this is the fourth estate is mentioned explicitly in our Constitution. It's something that is absolutely essential for a viable democracy. You have to, if people are going to make decisions about governance, they have to understand what's going on. They have to understand, science and technology as well. And there is such a thing as science journalism. And this is a thing that I have very mixed feelings on. I appreciate the scientific journalists, the people who are kind of pop sci journalists. I have a lot of problems with the way that this is done by and large. And I think the problems really stem from a number of things. So I'm going to kind of go through the categories, sort of lay out, maybe, I don't know if you'd call it a mission statement, but basically what I think the problem is and part of what I think the solution is. And one of the reasons why I might make this series, and which I'd almost like to make into a semester-long class, to be honest. We'll see how that goes. Probably just a bit of a pipe dream, but it's been like damn near a decade now. But Gil and I started a class. It's crazy how long ago that was and how fast time flies. But after I got my PhD, Gil and I started a class on basically supercomputing for non-majors and, like applications of high performance computing, distributed systems, distributed memory, like this kind of stuff for people who are not computer scientists, people who are in some other field, mainly with the idea that there's a lot of interesting stuff that you could do. And a lot of people just don't really understand the tools that are available enough to do it. That class was a pain in the ass to make, and I'm not sure I really, even getting it started was a ridiculous amount of work just to get it, started. Like, not even to teach it or to plan it, but just to get the department to let us start the class. Big deal. Getting a line number for a course, even bigger deal. We did not do that. This one ended up being not a special topics course, which is kind of the standard way to do this, but it was I can't even remember what it was called, something that somebody else started years before, and then they got the line number for it and stopped teaching it. And so we kind of we saw it there, the title was close enough, we adopted it and made it our own. I think it was a pretty decent class. There were things that could have been done better, but I think it was pretty good. So the problems with journalism today, and I do think there are many, and I'm obviously a scientist. I like science. My worldview, my epistemology is kind of scientific, and I'm going to talk a lot about science, but this is meant as a general thing. And I think in my fantasy dream, this would be a required course for everybody. If you're in journalism, if you're at the Cronkite School, for example, you have to take this class. And I think that it could be done in a way that would be very interesting and edifying. And hopefully, even if you're in, like, you have some existing knowledge about science or epistemology, it'd be interesting enough to, not bore you. And more importantly, it would help you be a better journalist. And I think that's something that we desperately, desperately need today. So one of the first things, I just read, I've seen this quote many times. I don't remember the source. This is one of the things that, I'm not a journalist, so I throw my hands up and use that. As a journalist, you should find the source for the quote and reference it. Number one. This is a thing that, I'm going to get back to what the quote was, but I keep seeing these articles, especially about COVID, but I see them about all kinds of things where it's like some article says that CNN said that the CDC said something. Now, and then the one that really just tipped me off on this was my mom shared something, and that article said some other news source said that the CDC said something. And then they had a link to not an article or any kind of primary source from the CDC, but to a tweet that did not have that information. It had nothing even, I guess you could say it was tangentially connected, but it was basically, this was, I think, from July 31st, and it was saying that something like 24% of pregnant women had been vaccinated, or had one dose at least of some vaccine or another. Now granted, this was before the American College of, OB-GYN? I'm not sure what their name is exactly, but something like that. Before they recommended doing it, and it was before it was FDA approved, so maybe that number's gone up, but it seems fucking crazy low to me. The WHO, long before this, was recommending it for pregnant women. There was really no evidence at all that it was any kind of risk, and the risk of getting COVID when you're pregnant is significantly worse than if you're not. And the risk to your child is actually pretty bad, because the thing that this causes, hypoxia, really not the thing that you want to induce in a developing brain. It's kind of dangerous. It's kind of a good way to cause brain damage. So probably something to be avoided, by which I'm saying get fucking vaccinated. Anyway, this is not how you do it. You find a primary source. And the quote that I was gonna reference here that made me think about this, and I'm gonna paraphrase it because, again, not a journalist, but if you're finding a quote and you're citing the quote, you should actually find the quote. But basically they said, if one person says it's sunny out and one person says it's raining, your job as a journalist is not to say, well, there's disagreement about it, nobody knows, and report the controversy. Your job is to stick your fucking head out the window and see if it's raining or sunny. See what the weather's like. Your job is not to report what somebody else said. It is to go to the original source. Now, granted, this one, just to use this example, it was a little bit hard because the original source said 24%, and then somebody at some point translated that to 3 out of 4 pregnant women had not been vaccinated, which is roughly, 25% versus 24%. They're pretty close. You can understand why somebody would say 3 out of 4. I kind of feel like this is a crutch. Like, I'm sure what this comes from is there's a thing that is probably pounded into people, which is basically, people can't understand percentages, it's much better to give them fractions or something like this. I don't know, 3 out of 4, maybe I'm just weird. 24%, I get that that's about a quarter, a little bit less. I think that's something that people could do. And I'm really convinced that, and I think this goes into the journalistic malpractice, I am convinced that this approach where you're constantly chasing the lowest common denominator and constantly presenting the news for basically morons is severely, you know, just debilitating people, like rendering them morons, basically, because people will rise or fall to the level that you present them. If you speak in third grade language, they will sort of get to that level. Walter Cronkite, namesake of the school, did not speak in third grade language. Now he was pretty plain spoken. He spoke, I would say, relatively eloquently, but he spoke with adult words. And by adult words, I don't mean profanity. I mean, words that were not the words of a child. These are words that assumed that the audience was actually populated by educated people, by people who could understand him. And people did. By and large, people did. I don't think chasing an audience this is the same thing that drives me nuts with politicians, especially Democrats. Chasing polls, you're kind of, you're chasing where the puck was and not where the puck is going to be. And you're certainly not steering the puck. You're just kind of racing after it. So this thing, not finding the primary source, presenting things as always a debate. It's never like definitively, obviously, and this is one of the things that I would touch on in this course, scientific epistemology. I would have this be like a day or so, and basically just talk about how we know what we know, how science interprets the world. And I think everybody going through this course, and frankly, everybody in the world should think about this. They should be aware of what their epistemology is, and probably several epistemologies, and no, not necessarily because you should they're all the same and you should just kind of decide for yourself, which I think is a really fucking horrible thing. It's another crutch that people have taken, but it's not a thing that you should be doing. Decide for yourself. Now, I'm always bothered by this because, on one hand, having a priesthood, having the experts who are sort of venerated and elevated above you, and they know things and just listen to them and all of this, that's not good. That's obviously bad. Now, simultaneously, this thing that people have done today, which is kind of, I'm just gonna go on YouTube, I'm gonna go, do some searching online, and then I'm gonna decide for myself. This gets you anti-vaxxers in ridiculous numbers. It also today gets you people who are, I'm not anti-vax, I'm just selective. You're fucking anti-vax. If you're saying, it's like, I'm not a racist, but I'm not anti-vax, but it's the same fucking thing. Now, this is a massive problem, and it's something that I think you are not equipped, if you haven't had the training, to make a lot of judgments. I'm not a lawyer. I can read legal contracts, I can look at the Constitution, I can have opinions on things, but I am not able to render legal judgments in the same way that somebody who has been trained in the law, and especially, say a constitutional law professor, would be able to say certain things about these. Now that doesn't mean that they're always right, but it does mean that expertise means something. And it also means that, you should understand not only what you know and what you don't know, but what you're not even in a position to make a decision about. I can have an opinion about a lot of things. That doesn't mean my opinion is worth a fuck. My opinion about physics or robotics or machine learning, distributed systems, microbiology, virology, lots of things I'm kind of an expert at. But my opinion on art is just a novice opinion. It's not a trained, educated opinion. Art is an interesting example because everyone can look at a painting and come to some kind of decision and judgment about it. But that doesn't mean that you understand really the painting in the proper context. It doesn't mean you know, oh, this artist was inspired by this and they're doing this style and this is kind of where it fits in terms of art history or film. You can watch Casablanca, and if you've seen a lot of films before watching Casablanca, you'll look at that or Citizen Kane. Somebody else used this example, but similar idea. If you've seen a lot of films, you'll watch these movies and think these are very derivative. They feel derivative. They feel like bad versions of things that you've already seen in other movies. And the thing you don't realize, of course, is that in their time, in that context, they were very original. They were kind of groundbreaking. And they did things that have been copied, and then the copies copied and improved upon many times. So your context is the world where all of these ideas have kind of been dispersed and improved upon, and you're very familiar with them. It's hard to put yourself in the mindset of somebody who has not seen that stuff. And even if you can't do that, it's hard just to understand what that context was. You have to do some work. And that work doesn't necessarily mean you have to be an expert. Like, you can take a film appreciation course or some kind of study like this and get a little bit more in that direction. You can certainly, it's not a binary thing. It's not like you have to be an expert or not, but you have to have enough understanding of things to be able to make these judgments. And one of the things that I see, and again, this goes into journalistic malpractice, is that journalists will report things, and again, this is lazy. This is just plain lazy. They'll report things as though there's a debate. It's always, more interesting to somehow frame it as a debate. Climate change. There's no real debate about the existence of anthropogenic climate change. It's pretty much established fact. It's, I would say, as much of an established fact as the fact that the sun is 1 AU away and that the Earth orbits it, and that at its core, it's powered by fusion, gravitationally confined fusion. These are essentially facts. There are things that, it's not like with absolute certainty that they are true, that they're the case, but pretty fucking well, And climate change, the fact that we have caused it, that's established. The fact that we're in an ongoing mass extinction event and that we've also caused that is an established fact. This is not like a debate. And yet people frame these things as though, there's some kind of debate. The thing, I have not had, cable. I've had internet for a long time, but I've not had cable TV in a very long time. I've not really, other than like if I go through the airport or at the gym or something, somebody's got new giant air quotes news on, CNN or Fox or these kinds of things. I've not watched this stuff, but I do see clips of stuff from time to time, and most of what they do, first off, it's not a secret that it's infotainment. It's not really designed to inform. It's not designed to help people make decisions or understand the world around us, or to be better citizens, better participants in our democracy. It is designed to get eyeballs and to sell commercials, sell bullshit in the commercials. So that is what these things are. It's very much like MTV is not for music videos anymore, even though it's got music television in its name. These things, CNN, it's not a news network anymore. Fox for sure is not a news network. And all of these things do have things where they actually present some evidence and facts, but by and large, what they seem to do is basically opinion pieces. Opinion is not journalism. Now, opinion is interesting, it's sometimes useful. I have mixed feelings about it, and I certainly think, New York Times is a particular culprit here, but there are many examples of this where people are trying to show opinions of sort of, the principled conservative, I'm deliberately being very sarcastic here, but the principled conservative position on X. And I have to say, like, first off, conservative, I'm going to get a little political here, I'm sorry, but conservative and Republicans have nothing to do with each other. They're, maybe at one point they were, but I don't even know if that's ever true. Like, certainly in my lifetime, I mean, you look from the 80s through the present, they're not remotely financially conservative, fiscally conservative, though somehow they've got the reputation for it. They basically, and the Tories in the UK do the same thing, they essentially exist to undermine government and then to privatize things, to reduce the tax burden on wealthy people, and to find ways to pull government funds, tax dollars, and put them into private hands. This is essentially what they do. This is not a conservative position. They sure as fuck are not environmentally conservative. They're not socially conservative. I mean, they're, pretty much any metric you want to slice it by, they're not conservatives. So I hate the fact that people call it that. But also, and it is good to try to understand many facets of things. But there's a massive problem now that people present, and I think this also goes back to this both sidesism that, and again, journalistic malpractice, that people present like sort of, here's the Democratic position, here's the Republican position, and we should understand both. And yet, you should understand various positions on various issues. The problem is, neither one of these parties really has good positions that are well-founded in either evidence or principles on pretty much anything. It's kind of staggering and sad. The Republican positions very much are just dominated by cut taxes, cut services, basically fuck people over, freedom, but if you have a uterus, we're gonna very tightly regulate how you can use that fucking thing. But if you want to have guns, just go sick. That's by and large the Republican position. Now, you want there to be some kind, like, I totally understand. You want to think that there's something more there. You want to think like, they have different principles from me and they're arriving at these conclusions based on, no, that's not the case. And this is the problem because you have like these op-eds, again, in the New York Times is, again, particular culprit, but this is common. You're trying to present air quotes conservative positions, and they get Brett Stevens to basically deny climate change. You get some, religious motherfucker to make these kinds of arguments, and you're like, they make some kind of post hoc rationalization for their positions, but it's not really the principles that are leading to the conclusions. It's the conclusions that have a lot of window dressing placed around them to kind of give it the air of a rational decision based on principles, when in fact it's not. And how do I know this? How could you possibly know this? Well, I can't know what's in somebody else's head. Absolutely true. But there's parsimony. And at a certain point, you look at the facts, you look at the evidence, you look at the way things go and what people say and what people do, and you really, I think, are just forced to conclude this, because the alternative requires epicycles upon epicycles to try to come up with some kind of a coherent picture which makes sense. If you remove that constraint, then the answer, I think, is clear and obvious. But you kind of don't want to see that because you'd like to think there's more to it than that. I think this is often why people generally kind of resort to conspiracy thinking, conspiratorial thinking, rather than like, which is not to say there aren't real conspiracies, but by and large, the things that look like conspiracies are sort of conspiracies without conspirators. They're things where a bunch of people acting independently of their own personal self-interest end up acting in a way that seems the same as if there was a conspiracy. The parsimonious explanation there often is conspiracy without conspirators. Which is not to say, again, like, there are conspiracies, there are really things like this, but they're generally very difficult to execute, very small numbers of people, and if you start getting very big, they fall apart quickly. It's hard to maintain that. And it's something that I think becomes very obvious, but people don't like to think that the world is sort of chaotic and just random to some extent. It's similarly a problem, I think, with people who have a very strong religious background and foundation. They try to construct this this world, this interpretation of the world, where they're adding in a bunch of meaning and a bunch of things that just there's no evidence for. And they want it so badly that they, really squint, use their imagination, and try to see it. And if you do that, you can see whatever the fuck you want to see. It's possible. Doesn't mean that it's there. So, getting back to the course, I would like to talk about this kind of stuff, sort of the foundational stuff. I'd like to talk about how to go through things like Google Scholar, academic publications, and really understand what it means to have a paper published. If it's peer-reviewed, does not mean that that is a piece of fact. It is a piece of evidence, and it made it past peer review, which means that it did, it satisfied certain criteria. Does not mean that it's been completely fully vetted and replicated by anyone. And part of the idea with putting stuff out there is basically you put it on the wall and you give people the opportunity to kind of knock it down. And they sort of shake it out, like pick it up, look at it from several angles, shake it up, hit it with a stick, and then you see, does it fall apart or does it seem sturdy? And if it seems sturdy, you sort of build on it, make another publication, and so on and so forth. And over a large succession of these kinds of things, you get to something which is closer and closer, ideally, to the truth. This is part of the scientific or epistemology as well. Again, there are other epistemologies, but I kind of subscribe to this one. That's, that would be probably a couple of days, talking about how to find those articles, how to weigh them, how to interpret them. One thing that I think really needs to be talked about and understood is the way that scientists tend to talk. Because scientists, generally speaking, understand, especially like if somebody has a PhD and somebody is in academia and they're publishing stuff and they're doing research, by and large, they're not going to make declarative statements. They're going to hedge things. This does not mean that, things are kind of like 50-50 and it could go either way. This is basically just them being careful not to overstate their case. The problem is that people take that and they interpret it in a context which is sort of the day-to-day usage of stuff, which I think is wrong, by which I mean, we should not be treating things like this. Generally speaking, in normal life, if you kind of hem and haw a little bit, you kind of say like, well, could go this, could go this. people tend to interpret that as you just don't have a fucking clue. When in fact you might be like, I'm pretty sure of X, but there's a chance that I'm wrong. That's what you're saying, and in reality you're saying like, well, there's basically like 99.9% confidence that this is the case, but there's always, some uncertainty. Understanding that would go a long way. And again, it does not matter if you're just a scientific or a science journalist or reporting anything. Understanding sources, understanding what these things mean, and like if you're talking to somebody who is an expert, understanding the kinds of language that they use, and I don't mean that as scientific jargon, but sort of the way that they talk about knowledge and what they understand, what their interpretation of evidence is, that is vital. And again, not doing it, journalistic malpractice. One thing that I'd really like to do is kind of a primer on a bunch of subjects. And so this would be probably in this context, one video per, but in the class, maybe a class per, or it might, some subjects might get condensed down, some might extend over to a couple classes, but basically, have something on astronomy and earth science, have something on meteorology, have something on physics and microbiology, bacterial ubiquity, virology, basic biology. Talk about DNA, talk about protein expression, transcription, translation, all of this kind of stuff. These are things that, you could go into great depth and really have a deep understanding of molecular biology, but there are also things that if you're, just pretty much anyone, you could get a broad strokes understanding of these things. And certainly if you're a journalist, and especially if you're a scientific journalist, but any journalist at all should be able to understand these things. And part of the reason I want you to understand them is because I regularly see articles where somebody says something that is just on the surface bullshit. Like, your bullshit detector should go off, and you should just listen to them, and you're like, yeah. And again, the bullshit detector is not a foolproof device. It can have false positives, it can have false negatives. But if the bullshit detector is going off and you've tuned it well so you don't have too many false negatives, when it goes off, that means investigate a little bit more. And when people say shit that is just bullshit, that's a nice way to figure it out. It's not the only tool in your belt, but it's something that you should have. Reporting stuff that is just basically transcription of what somebody put in the press release, not fucking journalism. Journalistic malpractice. And I understand you have problems there because you want access, and so it's hard. But at the same time, you have to kind of figure out, is it sunny or raining out? And you have a duty. It's literally your duty as a journalist to report to the best of your ability what the reality is. And, in the process, give the sort of line of reasoning, give the evidence for and against. If you want to go a little bit both sides, you're putting in a little bit of evidence against, a little bit of evidence for, and then you kind of go like, this is the preponderance of evidence, this is the conclusion as we best understand it today. Now that's not to say that you can definitively go to some, oracle that tells you this is the truth, but you can get successively closer to it. And there is really a sort of observer independent universal underlying reality as far as I know, which seems pretty, again, could all be just an illusion, could just be in my mind, probably not. And again, I'm hedging there in the sense that a scientist hedges, not in the sense that some random person on the street hedges. It's interesting, Donald Trump or Joe Biden, let's not pick on one in particular, will say things with absolute certainty. And these things will be complete fucking lies. And it's just surreal and maddening. Because you'll have a scientist who will go, well, you know, it could be this, could be that. And that person is talking about something where they have 99.999% confidence that something is a certain way. And they're still looking at that, you know, 0.001% chance that they're wrong. And they're trying desperately to present that uncertainty to you. Understanding that and appreciating that would be really good. And every time you write an article or you go on TV or on YouTube, whatever, every time you do that, you have, as a journalist, an opportunity to educate people. You know, if you're talking about mRNA vaccines, you have an opportunity to talk about transcription and translation. You have an opportunity to talk about selective immunity and B cells and T cells, and you could go into any amount of depth you want, but you have an opportunity, and that's a precious thing. There's an endless amount of stuff you could write on pretty much any story at all if you wanted to dig in. This is one of the things also that I think people don't tend to understand, and I want to make this very clear in the class, or this series, if I do it. I'm going to go over like a full discipline that people spend their lives studying a tiny sliver of. And I'm going to do it in a very short period of time and with imperfect knowledge and, you know, in kind of a very high level. It's very important to understand on listening to that, on watching that, on, you know, going to that class, you know very little. You know, you have just the barest scratch of the surface knowledge after that. So you know more still probably than a lot of people about that subject, but you don't know that much. And understanding that and also, again, conveying that to people, deeply important. Understanding that the tiniest sliver of one of those subjects is something that somebody has probably devoted their lives to, and they are the world expert. If somebody has a PhD, they are, at least at the time of the PhD, the world expert on some tiny little pinprick of human knowledge that nobody else has the same expertise on. And, you know, I mean, there's the saying, you learn more and more about less and less until you know everything about nothing. Partly it's said tongue in cheek, but it's also partly like you're in your PhD focusing on something that's very tiny, and you know everything about this just nothing little thing. Which is not to say you don't know a lot about other things, but, you know, it's like difficult to convey that in proper context. But I would try in the course. Another thing that I would put in, and I think this one is it's pretty important also, but it's how to get in touch with scientists, how to talk to them, and really not just how to interpret the things that they say, but, you know, just kind of how to have that conversation. People are very interested in talking about their research. If you can find them, and they're probably out there, they're a big resource. Now, you do at the same time have to understand that if somebody is talking about something and they're not that keen on talking about stuff, or they're like the leading expert on X, and X happens to be really hot and they're getting like bombarded by stuff, maybe that's part of understanding this, that, you know, maybe ask them, but maybe don't bother them too much, or maybe find somebody else who's interested in this subject. It doesn't have to be the same person. One thing that I would really like to address in the course is basically cacao and Neil deGrasse Tyson and Dawkins. Like, man, these people who are all experts in their fields, their respective fields, but they kind of stray so much from it, and I'm sure that they have convinced themselves that they know a lot more about a lot of things that they don't know about. Certainly, I am not immune from, none of us are immune to that. And it's really dangerous. And it's one of those things like really teasing apart the meaning of expertise, the significance of it, and what you should take away from what an expert says. Now, understanding also, going back, experts are not the only ones who can make decisions about things, but even if they're wrong, they're probably wrong about something for better reasons than you might be right about it. You can flip a coin half the time you're right about something. Does not mean that you understand it. That's an important thing. Expert could be very deeply understanding something and make a mistake based on that understanding, and that mistake could be very understandable, so to speak. Use the same word a couple too many times there, but anyway, kind of go over the primer of these domains, scientists, and then I think that I would kind of cap it off with how you can go forward, how you can learn more about all of these things, and especially, I feel like I would just have at the end kind of a marching order, I guess, that your job as a journalist is vitally important. Returning to what I said in the beginning, it is absolutely essential for democracy, and it needs to be taken seriously. And playing these games and playing fast and loose with understanding of things, presenting controversy where there is none, this kind of stuff, giving people the, here are the facts and you decide, that kind of bullshit, all of this is bad. Journalistic malpractice, highly detrimental. And I mean, a million Iraqi civilians died because of it. How many wars? How many people have died? How many people will die from climate change? How many people died from lung cancer because of journalistic malpractice? It is a serious thing. And, you should be fucking cautious about this stuff. Don't lend your credibility to bullshit. And, every time you're out there, making a fluff article or doing one of these, who knows, you decide kind of bullshit things, you're pushing the ball in the wrong direction. Every time you're pushing it in the right direction, like that might not seem like much, but everybody pushing in the right direction gets the ball moving. And, we live in this world, and however, good or bad it is on us. It is basically what we make of it, and we can make it a much better place or a much worse place. We have that opportunity. And as a journalist, you have the, sort of searchlight guiding light to show people the way. So that's a serious fucking thing. Anyway, I think with that, obviously, I haven't fully decided on whether or not I'm going to do this. I haven't decided on whether or not I would call it anything in particular. Certainly probably couldn't go in the class and, do a bunch of fucking this and fucking that. Probably the religion thing I would drop out. I have to pare that stuff down. And the one thing I'd have to do that I really hate doing is like outline stuff, because obviously extemporaneous speaking, not super conducive to this kind of thing. Would not be a tangents class, probably. Although I might, outline something and actually put in the tangents by hand. But, yeah. So if I make that, I might make it a separate, I'd probably put it in the tangents feed, because I don't have really the bandwidth. I don't have the bandwidth really to do this. I certainly don't have the bandwidth to do that and this. So we'll see. Will I do it? Will I not? Who knows? Mixed feelings on it. I think it is an important thing somebody should do. Whether it would be me or not, I don't know. Anyway, with that, thank you for indulging me. Thanks for listening or watching as always. And Sci-Jmc.